I will never forget the exact moment my son said those words. He was standing in front of me, a glass in his hand, faking a smile, while everyone waited for me to blow out the candle on my cake. The living room was filled with murmurs, forced laughter, and that fake enthusiasm you only find at family gatherings, where love became an obligation a long time ago. Linda, the gold digger, was laughing too loudly. The kids were playing without paying any attention, and Daniel, my own son, was staring impatiently at his phone. Then I heard it. It wasn't a shout. It wasn't a direct insult. It was worse. A sentence muttered under his breath, loaded with contempt and poison. I hope this is the last candle he ever blows out. For a second the air stood still. No one else seemed to hear it. Only me. The sound of those words stabbed me like a knife in the chest. I didn't react. I couldn't. I just looked at him in silence, with that calm you only learn after you've suffered too much. I smiled, pretending I hadn't heard, and blew out the candle. The smoke rose slowly, as if it wanted to carry away the little faith I had left in my own blood. Everyone clapped, laughed, and hugged me. Daniel didn't even come close. And yet, as the applause faded, I found myself looking at him with a serenity that unnerved him. My wish already came true, I said, looking him straight in the eye. You'll find out tomorrow. That made him frown. I gave a small smile. No one understood what I meant, but inside me, something had finally broken for good. After the cake, everyone went back to their shallow conversations. They talked about trips, new cars, business deals, things that stopped mattering to me a long time ago. I watched in silence, like someone watching a play that had nothing to do with them. I had spent my entire life building that home, working endless hours, giving up my own dreams, my rest, myself, so they would want for nothing. I had lost my wife, Teresa. It had been 8 years, and since then, I clung to Daniel as the only thing keeping me on my feet. But he had been cutting that tie little by little, with indifference, with pride, with the same contempt he showed me now. When everyone left, silence was my only guest. I sat there, staring at the extinguished candle on the half-eaten cake. The smoke still drew shapes in the air, as if trying to tell me something. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and sat at the empty table. I thought about Teresa, about how she would have reacted if she had heard her son say that to me. She always used to say, "Daniel has a fire in him, but if he doesn't learn to tend the flame, he'll end up burning what he loves." And he had. He had burned respect, kindness, and the memory of his mother. The clock struck 11:30 when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Daniel, short, dry, almost mocking. "Thanks for dinner, old man. Don't forget to pay the house insurance. Good night." I smiled. Not with anger, but with understanding. There was nothing left to save. I lost him years ago, but now I was finally accepting it. I turned off the dining room lights and went up to my room. In the hallway hung a photo of Teresa, her serene smile, her clear eyes. I stopped in front of it and murmured, "There's nothing more to be done, my love. But I promise you, tomorrow everything will change." I lay down, but I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, listening to the ticking of the clock, planning in silence. I had made difficult decisions in my life, but none like the one I was making tonight. It wasn't revenge that moved me, it was justice. A personal, moral justice that doesn't need courts or witnesses, only the weight of a conscience that can no longer stay silent. I remembered when Daniel was a child. He would ask me to lift him up to blow out the candles, and would hug me tight, repeating, "Make a wish, Dad." My wish back then was always the same. For him to grow up with kindness, to know how to love, to never forget that a good heart is worth more than any inheritance. But the years changed him. Or maybe it was the world, or Linda, or the money. I don't know. I only know that the boy who once looked at me with admiration had become a stranger I no longer recognized. At midnight, I got up. I went to my desk and opened the safe. Inside were documents, deeds, bank statements, everything I had spent decades building. I looked at them calmly. Each page represented years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and words swallowed out of pride. I took out the folders, arranged them on the table, and began to review them one by one. I knew exactly what I had to do. There would be no more begging, no late apologies, no empty conversations. What my son had destroyed with words, I would seal with actions. But before we continue, I'd like to know if you've subscribed to the channel, and if you're enjoying this story. This helps me know you're with me and enjoying what I write from the heart. Now, let's continue. I spent the rest of the night reading old papers, reliving memories. Each document was like a mirror of my life. The house, the workshop, the joint accounts. Everything was still legally in my name. I never transferred anything, not even after Daniel demanded it so many times. He told me it was for security, but what he wanted was control. He wanted power. I smiled when I realized that, without knowing it, I had kept the key to everything. Life has a cruel sense of humor sometimes. At 5 in the morning, I went out to the patio. The air was cold, and the sky was beginning to turn pink. I looked at the horizon and felt a strange peace. "Happy birthday, you old fool," Daniel had said mockingly as he poured my wine. But that phrase didn't hurt any more. Now it was a reminder, because this day, more than a birthday, would be a rebirth. When I went back inside, I took a blank sheet of paper and wrote 3 words in a firm hand. Wish granted, son. I left it on the table, next to the extinguished birthday candle. The sun was starting to stream through the window when I dialed the number of Robert, my lawyer and lifelong friend. He answered, half asleep. "Edward, what's wrong?" "The time has come," I said. "Today, I start over." I hung up without another word. The house was silent, but inside me, something was beating strongly. It wasn't revenge. It was dignity. And that flame, after being out for so many years, was burning once again. I slept little that night, and what little sleep I got was a strange, heavy dream, full of echoes from the past. I dreamed of Daniel as a boy, running through the yard with his hands covered in mud, laughing as his mother chased him with the garden hose. I dreamed of his pure laughter, of that look of admiration he gave me every time I taught him something, as if he believed his father could fix anything. I woke up with a bitter feeling, with the certainty that boy had died a long time ago. What was left now was a man who looked at me with indifference, almost with shame. I sat on the edge of the bed for a few minutes, looking at the hands that once held his. These same hands had built the house where he grew up, the same ones that picked him up when he fell, the same ones that fed him when his mother got sick. And now, these hands seemed foreign, old, tired. Maybe that's what he saw when he looked at me. An obstacle, a relic from the past that no longer fit into his new world. The morning coffee tasted sour, or maybe it was my mouth that couldn't taste anything anymore. As I drank, I looked out the window at the garden Teresa had tended so carefully. The withered flowers seemed to mirror my own state. Ever since she died, everything went downhill. Her absence changed everything. Daniel loved her, of course, but her death made him colder, more calculating. He buried himself in work, in money, in Linda, that woman who, from the very beginning, looked at me as if I were a burden. Linda came into our lives with a smile that seemed sweet, but with eyes that calculated every word. I remember the first time he introduced me to her. She shook my hand with a firmness that felt fake. "A pleasure, Mr. Miller," she said with a smile as white as her dress. She wasn't looking at me with warmth, but with inspection, as if she were sizing up the property. From the start, I knew she would be a crack in our family, but I kept quiet. Teresa always said you shouldn't judge the person your son chooses to love. How ironic. It was that love that pushed him away from me. Over time, Linda made sure to put distance between us. At first, it was subtle. "Your father is getting older, honey. Let him rest. Don't bother him with your problems." Then it became more direct. "The house isn't really set up for visitors anymore. It's better if he just stays in his own place." Each sentence was another brick in the wall she built between father and son. And Daniel, blinded by the comfort and admiration he felt for his wife, didn't see how she was manipulating him. But I saw it, and that was the worst part, watching your own son transform before your eyes, and being powerless to stop it. The years passed. The phone calls became sporadic. The visits, colder each time, came only on Christmas and birthdays, out of obligation. They brought expensive gifts, but their eyes were empty, and every time they left, the silence in the house grew heavier. It was as if, with each visit, they took another piece of my soul with them. I remember one afternoon in particular, a few years back. Daniel came to talk to me about the workshop I had founded. It was a small family business, fine woodworking. For decades, it was our livelihood and my pride. When Teresa died, Daniel took over. I thought it was the natural cycle of things, that my son would carry on the legacy. But he didn't. He turned it into something I no longer recognized. "Dad, times have changed," he told me that afternoon. "Your way of doing things is outdated." "Maybe so," I replied, "but honesty and respect never go out of style." He laughed, a short, arrogant laugh. "It's not about that. We just don't need that way of thinking anymore. Everything is business." That day, I knew something had broken. We no longer spoke the same language. What was pride to me was an obstacle to him. What was love to me was a pending debt to him. Little by little, Linda began to fill the space I had lost. She convinced him to sell part of the business, to move out of the house, to get away from the neighborhood where he grew up. Every decision pulled him further from his roots, from his mother, from me, and the worst part of all, he thought it was progress. Sometimes he would call me to ask for documents or signatures, but not to see me, always with that dry, administrative tone, without a hint of affection. "Old man, I need you to sign this." "Dad, I'm sending over the contract, just put your name on it." Never a "how are you," never an "I miss you." Only duties, never love. I remember the day he asked me to transfer the house deed into his name. It was the first time we argued with real harshness. "I don't want an inheritance," I told him. "I just want to live in peace." "That's not what this is about," he replied, annoyed. "It's for security. You have no idea how things work now." "I have a very clear idea," I answered. "I know exactly how ingratitude works." He didn't insist after that, but the look in his eyes changed. He no longer saw me as a father, but as an obstacle. The years continued on. I became a blurry figure in his life, someone to be remembered only when it was convenient. Until that birthday, my 63rd. Sometimes I think it was a gift from fate to hear what he said, as cruel as it sounded. Because in that sentence, "I hope this is the last candle he ever blows out," I finally understood who he was, and what he had turned me into. It wasn't just a wound, it was the confirmation of a truth I had ignored for too long. That love, when it's not cared for, rots. And when it rots, it smells of contempt. That afternoon, after reviewing old papers with Robert, I made myself a promise. I would not die with a heart full of bitterness. I would not give my son the satisfaction of seeing me defeated. I would not take the pain with me. I would find peace. But before I could find it, I had to restore the balance. Not with vengeance, but with justice. And that's how it all began. The wound was no longer bleeding. Now it was scarring over. But under that new skin, something was beating with force. A purpose. And when a man my age rises with a purpose, nothing and no one can stop him. They say memories are like cracks in the soul. You can try to cover them with time, with silence, with distractions, but they're always there, leaking out feelings you don't want to feel again. That morning, after talking to Robert, I went back to the workshop. It was almost in ruins. The tools hung on the wall covered in dust, and the smell of old wood still filled the air, like a sigh from the past that refused to fade. I placed my hand on the workbench where I spent half my life carving furniture, repairing dreams, giving shape to what the world had forgotten. I grew up there, and so did my son. But what was once a bond was now an open wound between us. As the sun streamed through the window, I was flooded with memories of when Daniel was just a boy. He used to spend afternoons with me, sitting on a small stool, watching my every move. He asked endless questions. "Dad, why do the boards smell different when you cut them?" Or, "Why do you only wear gloves for the oak wood?" I would answer patiently, smiling. I liked seeing him so curious, his eyes shining with that spark only children have when they still believe their father is invincible. Teresa, my wife, would peek in the door every so often, laughing. "Let him breathe, Daniel. Your father needs to concentrate." But he wouldn't move. He'd say, "I want to learn how to build things like you, Dad." That image is forever burned into my memory. The boy full of admiration, the woman I loved smiling at us from the doorway, and me, believing that happiness was eternal. How naive. Happiness, I learned later, is like damp wood. If you don't care for it, it cracks. As the years went by, Daniel started to change. He didn't want to come to the shop anymore. He said it smelled bad, that his friends made fun of him because his father worked with his hands, like a common laborer. It hurt to hear him say that, but I didn't show it. I just nodded and told him that all honest work deserves respect. He didn't answer. He was 15 and had a different look in his eyes, the same look I would later recognize in the mirror, the look of someone who is starting to feel ashamed of the person who raised them. Before he went further down that path, Teresa got sick, a cancer that fell upon us like a storm without warning. For months the house became a makeshift hospital. I worked endless shifts taking care of her, and Daniel, though he was strong at first, slowly began to disappear. He couldn't stand to see her weak, he said, or maybe he couldn't stand to face the fear of losing her. I remember her last night. Teresa could barely speak, but she asked me to come closer. I took her hand, cold and light like a dry leaf, and she looked at me with those eyes that had always made me feel at home. "Edward," she said. Promise me you won't let money change you both. Promise me that when I'm gone, you'll take care of him even when it hurts. I promised her I would. It was the hardest promise I ever made. Because loving her also meant accepting that her departure would leave a void impossible to fill. We buried her on a cloudy day. Daniel didn't cry. He stood motionless, his fists clenched. I tried to hug him, but he pulled away. From that day on, something between us shattered. It wasn't sudden. It was slow, like a crack that widens over the years until everything collapses. After the funeral, the shop became a place of ghosts. I worked alone, without talking, without music, without the echo of Teresa's voice telling me to rest. And Daniel? Daniel drifted further away each day. Sometimes he wouldn't come home. Other times he'd come in late, smelling of alcohol with a lost look in his eyes. One day he yelled at me, "You let her die." It was like a knife to the soul. I didn't answer. There was no possible answer. Guilt, when you love someone, becomes an animal that never sleeps. Years passed and the distance became normal. When he met Linda, I thought maybe she would bring some light. How wrong I was. Linda didn't come to unite. She came to divide. From the beginning, I noticed the way she looked at him, not like a partner, but like a project. I saw ambition disguised as love in her eyes, but I stayed silent, out of respect, out of fear of pushing him further away. Teresa had asked me to, and that promise was the only thing still keeping me upright. Time went on. Daniel got married, had children, moved away, and little by little I ceased to exist in his world. He would visit on special occasions, with that condescending air of someone who thinks they've outgrown their origins. Sometimes he talked about investments, trips, plans, and I would pretend to listen, though what I really felt was that each of his words pushed me further away from the son I once knew. One day, while fixing an old chair in the shop, I found a note Teresa had left among her things. It said, "If you ever feel like you can't go on, look at your hands. In them is everything you were capable of building. And if our son ever forgets who you are, let him fall. Sometimes only the ground teaches you how to look up at the sky." That note changed something in me. I didn't fully understand it then, but now, remembering it, I knew it was a warning. Teresa had seen what I refused to see, that blind love also destroys. I put the note back in my pocket and left the shop. The afternoon wind moved the branches of the lemon tree we planted the year Daniel was born. It no longer bore fruit. The branches were dry, twisted. I walked over and cut one of them. The wood was hollow inside, just like us, whole on the outside, but empty on the inside. And that's when I understood. The cracks weren't just in the past. They were in me, too. And that night, for the first time, I let them hurt without hiding them. That night, it rained like it hadn't rained in months. The sound of the water hitting the windows was constant, almost hypnotic. And in the middle of that noise, I found the courage to make the call I had been avoiding for years. The phone was on the table, next to the birthday candle I still kept. I looked at it for a long time before dialing. It still had remnants of melted wax at its base, as if it had cried with me. I don't know if it was the rain, the loneliness, or Teresa's voice echoing in my mind. But that night I understood that silence was no longer protecting anyone. Silence, when it goes on for too long, becomes an accomplice to contempt. I took a deep breath and dialed Robert Sullivan's number. We hadn't spoken in years. We had been friends since we were young, when we worked together on the first contracts for the workshop. Then he became a lawyer, I stayed in carpentry, and life took us down different paths. When Teresa died, he called me several times, but I didn't have the strength to answer. Now, after all this time, I heard his voice on the other end of the line, deep, a little tired, but still firm. "Edward?" he said, surprised. "I can't believe it. Is that you?" "Yes, Robert. It's me." There was a brief silence. I could feel him trying to measure my words, to understand what had driven me to call him after so many years. "Are you okay?" he finally asked. "I've been better, but that's not why I'm calling. I need to see you, tomorrow if possible. Of course, man. Anywhere you want. Not at my house." My voice came out colder than I expected. "I'd prefer your office." I hung up without further explanation. I didn't want to give details over the phone. I stood there for a while, looking at my reflection in the window. The man I saw was no longer the same one who had raised Daniel. His hair was whiter, his eyes more sunken, the look of someone who has understood that love can also become a weapon if given without measure. The next morning, the rain had stopped. The sky was clear, and the air smelled of wet earth. I put on my best jacket, the one Teresa gave me for our 30th anniversary, and headed downtown. I walked slowly, my heart heavy but determined. I knew that what I was about to do would change the course of my family forever, but I also knew that I could no longer be a spectator to my own humiliation. Robert's office was the same. Walls covered in books, the smell of paper and old coffee, and a dim light coming through the side window. When he saw me walk in, he stood up immediately and hugged me. I felt a mix of surprise, affection, and concern in his gesture. "It's been too long, my friend," he said with a sad smile. "I thought you had forgotten about the world." "I almost did," I replied, taking a seat, but the world didn't forget about me. We spent a few minutes in silence, like two old men reconnecting with the weight of years on their shoulders and too many things to say. Finally, he looked me in the eyes and asked, "Why are you here, Edward?" I thought for a few seconds before answering. "Because I don't want to die a coward anymore." I took a stack of yellowed documents from my briefcase. Deeds, certificates, contracts. I spread them out on his desk. He looked at them carefully, adjusting his glasses. "These are," he murmured, "the properties for the workshop, the house, the accounts. Are they all still in your name?" "Yes." My voice was firm. "I never transferred them. Daniel tried several times, but I refused." Robert looked up, surprised. "So, legally, everything is still yours?" "Exactly." I leaned towards him. "I want to move everything." Robert was silent for a few seconds. He knew what I was asking for wasn't a simple transaction. He watched me with a frown. "Edward, this is about your son, isn't it?" I nodded slowly. "Yes. It's about him and what he has become." I told him everything. The dinner, the words, the accumulated contempt, the years of distance, the way Linda had manipulated him until he believed I was a burden. As I spoke, he didn't interrupt once. He just listened, with the calm of a man who has seen too many similar stories. When I finished, he sighed. "I can't blame you for feeling this way," he said. "But tell me, what exactly do you want to do?" "I want to leave him with nothing," I replied without wavering. "But not out of hatred, Robert. As a lesson. I want him to understand that respect can't be bought, that money doesn't make him invincible, that a man who despises his roots is condemned to be left without a shadow." Robert watched me in silence, his fingers intertwined on the desk. "What you're planning is big, Edward. And it's final. If you do this, there's no going back." "I don't want to go back," I said calmly. "I've taken too many steps into silence already." He nodded slowly, understanding my decision was made. "All right," he said finally. "Then we'll do this the right way. You won't leave any tracks, no legal resentments, just the truth." And he picked up his pen. We spent hours reviewing documents, signing papers, adjusting details. Everything had to be done quietly, without raising suspicion. Robert was meticulous, as always. He explained that we would reorganize my assets under a new trust, leaving Daniel without any access. When we finished, he offered me a coffee. "I don't know if this will bring you peace," he said, "but at least it will give you back control." I smiled, tired. "At this age, my friend, you don't look for control. You look for respect." I left his office with my soul stirred, but lighter. The afternoon wind was cold, but I didn't mind. I walked slowly down the avenue, watching people pass by, thinking about what was to come. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel fear. I felt purpose. That night, back at home, I sat in front of the hardened birthday cake and lit the candle one more time. The flame flickered, reflecting in my eyes. "You already know, Daniel," I whispered. "My wish has been granted." And as the candles slowly burned down, the fire illuminated the face of a man who had finally decided to live again. I had never felt time move so slowly. Each dawn seemed longer than the last, as if the days were dragging on purpose, forcing me to think over and over about what I had decided to do. But I didn't regret it, not anymore. The decision was made, and there was no trace of doubt left inside me. At 63, you learn that justice doesn't always come from judges, but from a soul that, tired of being silent, decides to speak. Over the next few days, I pretended everything was normal. I called Daniel as if nothing had happened. I asked about the kids, about work. At first, he was distant, as usual, but slowly he let his guard down. He told me about a new business deal, a real estate investment he was planning with his father-in-law's help. He mentioned that one day he would inherit my house and the land from the workshop, and that would give him the final push he needed to grow. I listened patiently, as the coffee grew cold in my hands. I didn't interrupt. I didn't tell him that those properties were already out of his reach. I just smiled and nodded, like someone listening to a stranger talk about a future that doesn't belong to them. That same afternoon, I went back to Robert's office. We had already signed the main documents, but the finer details remained. The bank transfers, the reallocation of assets, and the legal protection of my will. Everything had to be done discreetly, without alerting anyone. Robert greeted me with a tired look, but with the same firmness as always. "Are you sure you want to go through with this, Edward?" he asked, as he reviewed the folders. "More sure than ever," I replied without hesitation. "My son is no longer my son. He's a stranger who happens to have my last name." "I understand," he said, lowering his voice. "But what you're doing won't just affect him. It will also affect his children, his wife." "I know," I interrupted, "but they will get what they deserve. The example that respect is not demanded, it is earned." Robert nodded and started to write. The papers piled up on the table. I signed them one after another, without trembling. With each signature, I felt a piece of my burden lift. It wasn't resentment that guided me. It was liberation. For years, I had carried the weight of ungrateful love, and now, finally, I was letting it go. When we finished, he handed me a copy of each document. "It's done," he said. "From this moment on, Daniel is legally excluded from everything that belongs to you. Everything will go into a trust, and the beneficiaries will be the people you choose." I looked at him, my eyes moist but firm. "Then I want the beneficiaries to be my grandchildren. They are not to blame for the sins of their parents." Robert looked at me in silence. Perhaps he understood that my revenge was not against my own blood, but against arrogance. He shook my hand and said, "You are a just man, Edward. In your own way, but just." I smiled faintly. "I don't know about just, but at least I won't be naive anymore." That night I returned home with a calm I hadn't felt in years. I poured myself a glass of wine and turned on the radio, something I hadn't done since Teresa was alive. An old song filled the air, a melody she used to sing while cooking. I closed my eyes and imagined her there, in her flowered apron, dancing to the rhythm of that soft music. "Are you proud of me, my love?" I murmured. The silence answered me with tenderness. I felt that somehow she was with me every step of the way. I spent the next few days putting my life in order. I sold the car, closed some secondary accounts, and shut down the workshop for good. No one understood my decisions. The neighbors looked at me with curiosity, some with pity, thinking I was losing my mind. But I knew what I was doing. Every box I filled, every signature I made, was a page I was closing with determination. One Friday, Daniel showed up unannounced. He knocked on the workshop door, perhaps out of habit or maybe intuition. I opened it cautiously. "What are you doing here, old man?" he said in his usual mocking tone. "I thought you were retired from everything." "That's the plan," I replied calmly. He walked in without asking, looking around. "Wow, this place looks like a museum. You planning on selling it?" "Yes. To someone who still knows what it means to work with their hands." Daniel laughed, a dry, arrogant laugh. "Nobody pays for memories, Dad. People want results." "You said it yourself," I answered, "and the results will be coming soon." He didn't press the issue. He left with the same disdain he had arrived with, not realizing that it would be the last time he would see the workshop standing. The next day, I signed the final sale. A young craftsman bought it, someone who reminded me of myself when I was young. As I shook his hand, I felt something closing within me and something new beginning. I spent the weekend preparing a family lunch, not out of affection, but for closure. I wanted to see their faces together one last time before showing them what I had truly built in silence. I did the shopping myself. Wine, meat, freshly baked bread. I put fresh flowers on the table, and in the center, the old birthday candle. I wanted it there, a silent witness to what was about to happen. When I finished setting everything up, I looked at myself in the dining room mirror. I saw a different man. No longer a victim, no longer a wounded father, but someone who had learned to say enough without raising his voice. I smiled for the first time in a long time. That night, I wrote a letter. It wasn't long, but it was final. In it, there were no reproaches or tears, only a truth written with calm. "Son, property can be inherited, but dignity is earned. You left me without a family, but not without myself. Tomorrow, you will find out who I really am." I folded the letter and placed it under the tablecloth, right where he would be sitting. And so, as the house slept, I understood that the wish I made in front of that candle wasn't for revenge. It was to awaken. Sunday dawned clear, with a sky so clean it almost felt like a joke. Everything was ready early. The table was covered with the white tablecloth Teresa had embroidered by hand. The plates were aligned. The wine was breathing in the decanter, and the aroma of roasted meat filled the house. It was a perfect day to end years of humiliation. As I moved around, checking the final details, I felt my heart beating slowly, as if it knew this day would be different. There was no anger in me, no anxiety, just a strange peace, the calm of someone with nothing left to lose. In the center of the table, the old birthday candle waited, lit, thin, almost consumed. I looked at it tenderly. It was my witness, the same flame I lit when I heard my son wish for my death. The sound of the doorbell interrupted my thoughts. It was Daniel. He arrived with Linda, his wife, and the children, all dressed in their Sunday best, smiling as if nothing was wrong. She entered first, looking around with that haughty expression she never lost. "What a surprise you invited us, Edward," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We thought you were, I don't know, upset." "No, Linda," I replied calmly. "There's no room for anger today. Today, I just want to share a family lunch." Daniel shook my hand half-heartedly. I couldn't help but notice he didn't even look me in the eye. The children ran into the garden, laughing, oblivious to the tension in the air. Behind them came Daniel's father-in-law, a man in an expensive suit and a fake smile, the same man who tried to buy my land for a real estate project years ago. I couldn't help but feel a slight shiver. The irony of life. The man who wanted to take what I had built was now part of my family. We all sat down. The conversation was superficial, full of empty phrases. Linda talked about their vacation, her father about investments, and Daniel about his promising future. I listened without interrupting, like someone watching a play whose ending they already know. Every word they said confirmed the rightness of my decision. "Dad," Daniel said, raising his glass, "I want to make a toast." "Of course," I replied calmly. "To you," he said in a theatrical tone, "for everything you've done." Linda smiled and nodded. "Yes, Edward," she added, "thank you for teaching us the value of hard work, even if some of your methods are a bit outdated." They all laughed. All of them except me. I raised my glass, looking them in the eye. "Let's toast yes, but not to the past. Let's toast to the future." Daniel smiled, satisfied. "Exactly. To the future of the family." I nodded slowly. "Yes, to the future." I took a sip of wine and stood up. I walked to the cabinet and took out an envelope. I placed it in front of Daniel. "Before we eat, I want to give you something," I said. He took it, curious. "What is this?" "Your gift." He opened the envelope and started to read. As he read, his face changed. First disbelief, then confusion, and finally panic. "What does this mean?" he asked, his voice trembling. "It means," I replied, not looking away, "that everything I owned, everything you took for granted as yours, no longer belongs to you. The house, the workshop, the accounts. Everything has been transferred to your children's names." Linda shot up from her chair, her eyes wide with shock. "What are you saying?" "You heard me," I said. "The next time you talk about the future, make sure you have one." Silence fell over the table like a stone. Her father cleared his throat, uncomfortable. The children, unaware, continued laughing in the garden. Daniel looked at me, his voice broken. "You can't do this to me, Dad." "I already have. This is insane. No. This is justice." Linda slammed her hand on the table. "You're leaving us with nothing." "No, Linda. I'm leaving you with what you built. Nothing." Daniel stood up, furious. "You're going to regret this, old man." I stood up too, calmly. I already did. For years I regretted staying silent. But today. No. Today, finally, I regret nothing. Linda shrank back, pale. Her father tried to intervene, but Daniel pushed him aside. He was out of his mind. "And you think this makes you a better person?" he spat. "You're a miserable old man." I smiled serenely. "No, son. I'm the same man who taught you not to spit on the hand that feeds you. I just finally learned the lesson myself." There was a long, unbearable silence. I could hear the wall clock, each tick like a hammer blow. No one said a word. Not even the children, who peeked into the dining room, confused by the shouting. "Dad," Daniel finally murmured, in a tone I hadn't heard since he was a boy. "Yes." I looked at him, without resentment. "Dad, you can still call me that if you remember what it means." Then I pulled one more sheet from the envelope. "Oh, and there's one more thing," I said. "What is it now?" Linda asked, her voice cracking. An invitation, I replied. Tomorrow, you'll receive a visit from the attorney. He'll explain the details. I sat back down. I picked up my glass and took another sip of wine. No one moved. No one ate. The lunch grew cold in front of us. Do you know what's saddest, Daniel? I said in a low, almost fatherly voice. It wasn't losing you as a son. It was realizing you never learned what love was. Teresa gave you tenderness. I gave you an example. But you chose arrogance. And that's the one thing I can't pass down. I stood up. I left my glass on the table and walked towards the door. Before leaving, I turned back. Oh, by the way, I added, the dessert is in the fridge, but I wouldn't recommend it. It's as cold as you are. I walked out into the garden, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. The air was clean. The candle in the center of the table was still burning, small, flickering, but alive. I smiled. My wish had come true. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was tormented by doubt, but because the silence after a storm has its own sound, an echo that gets into your bones. The house was still, too still. I could still smell the spilled wine on the tablecloth, the cold food on the table, Linda's perfume mixed with the smoke of the candle that had finally burned out. It was the smell of an ending. I sat in the living room without turning on the lights. Outside, dogs barked in the distance, and inside there was only the ticking of the clock. There was no remorse in me, not even sadness. What I felt was a strange calm, as if I had finally closed a wound that had been open my whole life. But calm doesn't last long when you know your decisions have shaken someone else's world. At 2 a.m, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I didn't need to answer to know who it was. I let it ring until the call disconnected. It rang again, once, twice, 3 times. I didn't answer. Then the texts came. What did you do, Dad? You can't leave us like this. You've gone crazy. I read them all, one by one, without replying to any of them. When the last message arrived, a simple, I hate you, I turned off the phone. It was the first time reading those words didn't hurt me. Dawn found me in the same armchair, the empty glass still in my hand. The sun came through the window, and in that moment, I thought of Teresa, of what she would say if she saw everything that had happened. Maybe she would have called me stubborn, maybe she would have cried, but I know that deep down, she would have understood, because she always knew that love must also be defended, even when it hurts. Mid-morning, the sound of an engine in front of the house broke my peace. I looked through the window and saw Linda's black car. She got out wearing dark sunglasses, her jaw clenched. She walked towards the door without hesitation. I touched the watch in my pocket out of instinct, not fear, but habit. When I opened the door, her voice cut through the air. What kind of monster are you? She said. One who learned too late, I replied calmly. You left us with nothing. No house, no money, nothing, she screamed. After everything we did for you. You didn't do anything for me, Linda, I said, looking at her serenely. You did it for yourself, for your image, for your parties, for that emptiness you fill with jewelry. She glared at me. Daniel is destroyed, she continued. He won't stop saying you betrayed him. Betrayed him? I laughed bitterly. All I did was remind him who I am and who his mother was. Your wife would not have wanted this, she spat. Do not say her name, I warned in a low but firm voice. Do not dare dirty her memory. Linda took a step back, trembling with rage. For a moment, I saw fear in her eyes, not because she thought I would hurt her, but because she understood she could no longer manipulate me. You're going to end up alone, Edward, she said, trying to wound me. Alone and forgotten. No, Linda, I replied. I've been alone for years, since the day you two walked out that door and never looked back. She was quiet for a few seconds. Then she turned and left without another word. The slam of the door echoed through the house. I stood there, motionless, listening to her car drive away. I didn't move. I felt no relief or guilt, just a deep exhaustion, the exhaustion of someone who has fought their whole life for a cause no one wanted to understand. Roberto arrived at noon. He brought the final documents. His face showed concern, but also respect. I figured you might need some company today, he said as he entered. No, I replied, offering him a coffee. Today, I just need silence. He sat with me in the kitchen, without saying a word. For a long while, the only sound was the steam hissing from the coffee pot. Finally, he spoke. You know your son is going to try to reverse this, right? I know, I answered without hesitation. But he won't be able to. Everything is legally protected, so this is final. It is, Roberto sighed. I'm not judging you, Edward. I just hope you don't end up drowning in the very thing you're trying to clean up. I'm not drowning, I said, looking out the window. I'm just emptying myself. And when a man empties himself, he makes room to breathe again. He nodded, he patted my shoulder and left. That evening, as the sun began to set, I lit a candle on my desk. It wasn't the birthday candle, it was a new one. I watched it burn for a long time. Fire has something hypnotic about it. It destroys, but it also purifies. And in that moment, I understood that my family name, the one I thought was eternal, had been reduced to that, ashes. Daniel carried my blood, yes, but not my soul. The name Miller no longer stood for honor or work, but for arrogance, ambition, forgetfulness, and that hurt more than any wound. But it also freed me, because, for the first time, I could look at my reflection without shame. I snuffed out the candle with my fingers, unafraid of the heat. The smoke rose slowly, drawing a shape that vanished in seconds. I thought about the lemon tree in the yard, the one Teresa and I planted the day Daniel was born. I went out to the garden and looked at it. It was still dry, but from one of the branches, a small green shoot was sprouting. I stood there, watching it in silence. Sometimes life has cruel ways of telling you that not all is lost. A few days have passed since that lunch that shattered the foundations of what I once called a family. The house is still quiet, but it's no longer a painful silence. It's different. A clean silence, without the shadow of resentment. I wake up early, make coffee, open the windows, and let the sun stream in without asking permission. For the first time in many years, the loneliness doesn't weigh on me. It belongs to me. I thought I would never see them again. Not my son, not Linda, not the children. And honestly, I didn't expect to. But one Tuesday afternoon, as I was sweeping the patio, I heard the doorbell. When I opened the door, I saw something that made my heart stop. It wasn't Daniel. It was the children. All three of them with their backpacks slung over their shoulders and their eyes wide with confusion. Behind them, a young woman, the nanny, greeted me with a mix of respect and nervousness. "Mr. Miller," she said, "your son asked me to have you watch them this afternoon. He has urgent matters to attend to." Urgent, I thought. They always were when it came to facing the consequences of his actions. The children ran inside. It had been so long since I'd heard their laughter in this house, that for a moment I felt like time was turning back. The youngest, Matthew, stopped in front of Teresa's portrait. "Was she Grandma?" he asked, pointing at the photo. "Yes," I replied with a soft smile. "And you have her eyes." The boy stared at her for a few seconds, as if trying to remember a face he never knew. Then he ran to the garden, and the others followed. They spent the afternoon playing among the dry leaves, laughing, getting dirty, making up stories. I watched them from the porch with a strange feeling, as if my heart, after being dormant for so many years, was starting to beat strongly again. When they got tired, I sat them at the table and served them juice and bread, just like Teresa used to do with Daniel when he was a boy. I didn't plan it. It just happened. The oldest, Nicholas, watched me in silence as he ate. "My dad is mad at you," he said with the brutal honesty only children have. I nodded slowly. "Yes, I know. He says you betrayed him." "Maybe," I replied. "But sometimes you have to do the right thing, even if other people don't understand." Nicholas looked at me curiously, and then, without another word, he kept eating. He didn't press the issue. Perhaps he understood more than his father ever wanted to. When the nanny came back for them in the evening, Matthew hugged me without asking. "Can we come back?" he asked. "Of course, son, this will always be your house." I watched them walk away, and for the first time in a long time, I smiled without sadness. The next morning, I found a small envelope under the door. It was a clumsily folded piece of paper, written in a child's handwriting. It said, "Grandpa, thanks for letting us play. Dad cries when he thinks we're not looking. I don't understand why you're fighting, but I want you to love each other again. Mom says you're a bad guy, but I don't think so. Bad guys don't make bread and juice for kids. I love you. Nicholas," was signed at the bottom, with a juice stain on the ink. I read that letter over and over. It was like a seed planted in dry earth. I felt something breaking inside me. It wasn't guilt or regret. It was hope. A soft, warm hope that reminded me of the words Teresa left in that old note. "If our son ever forgets who you are, let him fall. Sometimes only the ground teaches you how to look up at the sky." Maybe he was finally hitting the ground. Maybe for the first time Daniel was starting to look up. The following days felt different. I went into the garden and looked at the lemon tree. That dry branch that had shown signs of life now had new leaves, small and green. I stared at them for a long time. It couldn't be a coincidence. It just couldn't. The tree I thought was dead was coming back to life, and I couldn't help but think that, in a way, so was I. However, deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Daniel was proud. He wouldn't just stand by. Sooner or later, he would come to confront me, and when he did, I wanted to meet him with truth, not hatred, because by then, I had understood that vengeance without purpose becomes poison. I didn't want to destroy him, I wanted him to learn. That night, sitting at my desk, I opened a new notebook, not to write down accounts or documents. I wanted to leave something different. My story, the truths I never spoke, the letters I never sent, the wounds I never showed. I thought about the children, about the day that maybe, many years from now, they would read these pages. I wrote on the first page, "This is not a story of punishment, but of memory, because sometimes to love is also to teach how to lose." I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and stood by the window for a while. In the sky, a single star shone brighter than the rest. "Teresa," I thought, "you always knew that even wounded roots can bloom again." I knew that moment would come. You didn't need to be a psychic to understand that Daniel's silence was just the calm before the storm. I could feel it, the way you can feel the air before it rains. Thick, charged with electricity. I didn't know when he would show up, but I knew he would. Men like my son can't stand to lose control. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. The sky was gray, and the wind was blowing the curtains in the dining room. I was sitting by the window, reading, when I heard the unmistakable sound of his car pulling up in front of the house. I didn't run to open the door. I didn't have to. I stayed where I was, waiting. The knock on the door was sharp, impatient. "Dad!" his voice shouted, the same voice that had given me so many orders disguised as requests. "Open up!" I stood up calmly. When I turned the knob and saw him, I felt time stop. He looked different. His suit was impeccable, but his beard was messy, his eyes dark with exhaustion. He was a worn-out man, and yet the fury in his eyes was still alive. He walked in without waiting for an invitation, his steps heavy, his fists clenched. "So this is what you wanted," he said, without even a greeting. "To humiliate me in front of everyone? To ruin my life?" "I didn't ruin anything, Daniel," I replied. "I just took off the disguise." "You miserable old man," he spat. "Do you know how hard I worked to build what I have?" "I know. And I also know how hard you worked to destroy who you were." His breathing was fast, nervous. He ran a hand through his hair and started pacing. "Linda is beside herself," he continued. "Her parents are demanding explanations, the banks are pressuring me. And you just sit here, calm, as if you've done nothing. I did what I had to." "What you had to? Leave me with nothing? You call that fair?" "I gave you everything," I said slowly. "Everything I had, including my time, and you paid me back with contempt. Don't confuse justice with punishment." Daniel stopped in front of me. For a second I thought he was going to hit me, but he didn't. He just looked at me with his eyes full of something I couldn't define. Anger, sadness, fear, or maybe shame. "And the kids?" he asked, his voice breaking. "Did you use them too? Did you put them in the middle of this?" "No, I protected them," I answered firmly. "They're not to blame. You are." He fell silent. I watched him try to hold back tears, but his pride wouldn't let him. I know him too well. He was always like that, unable to cry in front of anyone. "I got a letter," he finally said, his voice low. "From Nicholas." My heart skipped a beat. "What did it say?" "That he loves you," he answered bitterly. "That he doesn't believe what we say about you. That you're a good person." I didn't know what to say. The image of the boy writing that letter came back to me like a punch to the chest. "Maybe you should listen to your son," I told him. "I don't need advice from you." "Yes, you do," I replied softly. "Because what you're doing to them is the same thing you did to me." Daniel looked at me, confused. "What are you talking about?" "About the chain," I said. "About the pride that gets passed from father to son, like a curse. I was hard on my own father, too. I also believed that love was shown with silence and discipline. But the day I lost your mother, I understood that to love is to say, 'I need you.' And you never learned that." Daniel clenched his teeth. "I don't need your pity." "You don't have it," I replied calmly. "What I'm offering you is the truth." He stood still, looking at me. The silence between us was as heavy as a stone. Outside, the wind continued to blow. The portrait of Teresa on the wall seemed to be watching us, as if she too had been waiting for this moment. "Why did you do all this?" he finally asked, without shouting, without anger. "Just tired." "Because I couldn't keep looking at you like a stranger anymore," I answered. "I had to do something to make you look me in the eye again. And you think this worked? I don't know, but at least now you're listening to me." Daniel looked down. For a moment, he seemed to give up. He walked to the table, saw the notebook where I was writing my memoirs, and ran his fingers over the cover. "What's this?" "My story," I replied. "For your children, so they know that dignity is also inherited." He nodded slowly. Then he put the notebook down and walked to the door. "I don't know if I can ever forgive you," he said without turning around. "I'm not asking you to," I replied. "Just to understand." Before he left, he stopped for a second in front of his mother's portrait. He looked at it for a long time, in silence. And without looking at me, he said something barely audible. "I miss her." When the door closed, I was alone again. But this time the silence was different. It wasn't the echo of a war, but the sigh of a truce. I went out to the garden. The lemon tree was still growing, green, alive. I cut a small branch and put it in a glass of water on the table. I looked at Teresa's portrait and whispered, "Maybe, my love, there's still something left to save." That night silence returned to my house. But it wasn't the same. There was something different about it, a kind of invisible murmur that accompanied me as I walked through the halls. It wasn't guilt, nor was it relief. It was something more like what a father feels when he stops fighting the inevitable, and finally learns to see life as it is. Daniel had been gone for hours, but his presence lingered, the echo of his footsteps, the tremor in his voice when he mentioned his mother, his lost gaze as he looked at her portrait one last time. There was something in him I hadn't seen in years. Fragility. The same fragility I once had, but that time, work and loss forced me to bury. I sat in the living room with the notebook open in front of me, a pen in my hand, and started writing without really knowing why. I wasn't trying to leave a lesson or justify my actions. I just needed to put into words what I had kept silent for decades. "Dear son," I wrote, "if you ever read this, I want you to know it wasn't hatred that guided me, but pain. Because love that isn't respected ends up rotting, and a father who doesn't defend himself ends up disappearing. I didn't want to punish you, Daniel. I just wanted to remind you who you were before you forgot your roots." I stopped. The sound of distant thunder pulled me from my thoughts. I got up and went to the bedroom. From the closet, I took out an old wooden box, the kind Teresa used to keep letters and photographs in. I opened it carefully. Inside were yellowed envelopes, black and white photos, and a folded handkerchief with her perfume almost completely faded. But among it all, there was something I had never seen before. A sealed envelope with my name and Daniel's written in her handwriting. I stared at the envelope for a long time. My hands were shaking. I didn't know if I had the strength to read it, but I opened it anyway. Inside were 2 letters, separated by a red ribbon. The first said, "For you, Edward," the second, "For Daniel." I started with mine. "My love, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. And I know that hurts you more than you're willing to admit, but I want to ask you something, and I know it's difficult. Do not lock yourself away in your pain. Do not turn it into silence. Do not raise our son with fear, because fear disguises love as hardness, and children mistake it for indifference." I felt a lump in my throat. I kept reading, tears blurring my vision. "He will love you in his own way, and his way will not always be yours. But when he hurts you, do not respond with more wounds. Respond with patience. Remind him who you are, and if he ever gets lost, don't look for him in memories. Look for him in his actions. Time does not erase love. It only hides it." I had to close my eyes. Teresa always knew how to see what I couldn't. While I fought to keep the family together, she understood that love isn't forced. It's sown. I held her letter to my chest, over my heart, and picked up the second one. I hesitated for a few seconds before opening it. "Son," it said, "when you read this, I probably won't be here anymore, but I want you to remember something I never told you enough. Your father loves you more than you will ever know. He doesn't always show it, because work, pride, and life have hardened him. But every sacrifice he made, every night he came home tired, was for you. If you ever feel he demands too much, understand that it is his clumsy way of protecting you. And if one day you judge him, remember that fathers make mistakes too, but almost always they come from a place of love." I had to rest the letter on my knees. The tears were falling uncontrollably. It was as if Teresa's voice was right there, speaking to both of us from a place where tenderness never dies. I stayed like that for a while, in silence, letting the paper absorb my tears. Then, carefully, I put both letters back in the original envelope and sealed it again. I felt I shouldn't keep it for myself. That letter wasn't just for me. It was for us. The next day, the sun rose bright, with a sky so clear it seemed impossible after so many weeks of clouds. I got dressed without rushing, took the envelope, and started walking towards Daniel's house. Every step felt heavy, not with fear, but with the certainty of what it represented. When I arrived, the door was ajar. I heard voices inside, Linda, the children, and the TV on. I knocked twice. Linda opened the door, surprised. "What are you doing here?" she asked, suspiciously. "I came to see my son," I said calmly. She didn't wait for an answer. She called for Daniel, and he appeared a few seconds later. His face was gaunt, but his eyes were no longer filled with anger, but with exhaustion. "What do you want now?" he asked, his voice weak. "To give you this," I replied, holding out the envelope. "It's from your mother." For a moment, the air seemed to stand still. Daniel took it with trembling hands. "Where did you find it?" "In a box. I kept it all these years without knowing it was there." "Did you read it?" "Mine, yes. Yours, no." He nodded slowly, without speaking. I looked him in the eyes. "Read it, son, but do it alone. And when you're done, don't call me. Don't look for me. Just think about what she wanted to tell you." I turned to leave, but before I did, I heard his voice. "Dad!" I stopped. "Thanks," he whispered. I didn't reply. I just nodded and walked out into the Sunday. That afternoon, I returned home. I sat in the garden, under the lemon tree. The wind moved the branches, and a fresh scent filled the air. I closed my eyes and felt something inside me settle. I don't know how much time passed, but at some point, I knew Daniel had read the letter. I knew it without him telling me, because the wind changed, and in it, I thought I heard Teresa's voice whispering, "It's okay now, Edward. It's okay." That night, for the first time, I slept in peace. Not because everything was resolved, but because I understood that redemption doesn't always come in the form of forgiveness. Sometimes it comes on a yellowed sheet of paper, written with love. 3 days have passed since I left Teresa's letter in Daniel's hands. I haven't seen him since. I didn't expect to. Everyone needs their own time to face what hurts, and his time, I know well, is one of silence. But still, there's something in the air, a different feeling, as if the weight of so many years is slowly starting to lift. The days pass quietly. The sun enters through the windows of the house with a kinder light, and the lemon tree in the yard, the one I thought was dead, now has small blossoms. I counted them this morning. 5. I don't know why, but I felt that number was symbolic. Maybe because it had been 5 years since we had truly spoken, even when we were at the same table. I've spent the last few afternoons writing in my notebook, not about Daniel or the inheritance or even Teresa. I write about simple things. The light at 6 in the evening, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of the wind slipping through the curtains. I've realized that peace, when it arrives, doesn't make a sound. It just sits beside you and waits for you to recognize it. Yesterday, while sweeping the patio, I heard a car engine stop in front of the house. I didn't look up right away. I kept sweeping, as if time was in no hurry. I heard footsteps approaching, the squeak of the gate, and then his voice. "Dad." I turned slowly. Daniel was there, his hands empty, with an expression I didn't recognize. He wasn't wearing a suit or a tie, just a simple wrinkled shirt, and a look that I couldn't tell if it was sadness or exhaustion. "Hello, son," I said, without surprise. "Can I come in?" "You always could." He entered slowly, looking at everything around him. The house was the same, but to him, it seemed new. He ran his hand over the back of a chair, touched the frame of a photo of Teresa, and then sat down across from me in the dining room. For a moment, neither of us said anything, just the clock marking time. "I read the letter," he said finally. I nodded. I figured. I didn't know Mom thought that way. "Neither did I replied, "until recently." He stared at the table. "She said I should try to understand you," he continued in a low voice, "that I shouldn't judge what I didn't know. Your mother was always wiser than me. She also said I should ask for your forgiveness." The silence that followed was long. Daniel's eyes were moist, but he didn't cry. He never cries. And yet his whole body seemed to be crying. "I didn't come here to say it," he murmured. "Not yet." "You don't have to," I said. There are things the soul understands without words. Then, without a word, he stood up and went to the garden. I followed him. He stopped in front of the lemon tree and looked at the white blossoms hanging from the branches. "It's alive," he said, almost to himself. "Yes," I replied. "Sometimes life disguises itself as death, only to come back stronger." Daniel reached out and gently touched one of the blossoms. "Did you plant this?" "We both did. Your mother and I, the year you were born." He smiled faintly. "I don't remember that." "That's normal," I said. "Children forget. Parents remember." We stood like that for a while, in silence. The sun was setting slowly, and the shadow of the lemon tree covered part of the yard. Daniel looked at the ground. Then he looked at me. "I brought something," he said. He went back to the car and returned with a small frame. He handed it to me without speaking. It was an old photo of Teresa, him, and me, in the workshop. A neighbor had taken it when Daniel was 8. She was smiling, her hands on my shoulders, and he, covered in dust, was holding a hammer that was too big for him. The photo had a torn corner, but it was still perfect. "I found it in a box," he said. "I thought it should be with you." I didn't know what to say. I just held it carefully, as if I was afraid the air would erase it. "Thank you, son." "No," he said softly. "Thank you." It was then that I noticed something in his eyes. It wasn't forgiveness. It was something harder, more real, understanding. The kind of look you only see when love shakes off its pride and shows itself as it is. Imperfect, tired, but still alive. We sat under the lemon tree. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. We talked about the workshop, the kids, work, small things. And though the words were simple, the tone was different. For the first time in years, Daniel spoke to me without distance. Not like an old man you have to be patient with, but like a father. When the sun began to set, he stood up. "I have to go," he said. "The kids say hi. Tell them I'll be waiting for them whenever they want to visit." He nodded. He took a few steps towards the door, but before leaving he turned and looked at me one last time. "Dad?" "Yes. Take care of it," he said, pointing to the lemon tree. "I promise I'll come see it grow." I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I watched him walk away, hands in his pockets, his pace slow, different. And I knew I didn't need to hear an apology when I had already seen it in his eyes. That night, I lit a candle and placed it next to the photo he had brought me. Teresa was smiling. Daniel was too. And I, in the reflection of the glass, found myself smiling as well. Sometimes forgiveness isn't spoken. It's breathed. And when it arrives, the only thing you can do is let your soul rest. I haven't marked the days on the calendar in a long time. I don't need to anymore. When you learn to live without resentment, time stops being a countdown and becomes a silent gift. Every morning I open the windows, let the fresh air in, and take a deep breath. The world is the same, but I am not. The lemon tree has bloomed. I saw it today from my chair on the porch, taller, with branches full of life. Its leaves shone in the afternoon sun, and bees buzzed around it. I thought of Teresa, of her soft voice telling me that life always finds a way to be reborn. She was right. She always was. It's been weeks since Daniel last came to see me. I don't blame him. Everyone has their own pace for healing. But since that day under the lemon tree, something has changed. His texts no longer sound like reproaches, but like presents. Sometimes he writes to tell me about the kids, or just to say, "Good night, old man," and that's enough for me. I don't need anything more. This morning, while I was having my coffee, I found a letter in the mailbox with no return address. It was his handwriting. Inside, just a few lines. I read Mom's letter again. "I understand everything now. Thanks for not giving up on me. I love you." Nothing more. But it was enough. I stared at those shaky words, written with the clumsiness of someone not used to saying what they feel. And I smiled, not with pride, but with gratitude. I put the letter in the notebook where I wrote my story, the notebook I started the day I decided to end the silence. It's almost full now. Each page is a confession, a lesson, a farewell. I don't know if anyone will ever read it. Maybe my grandchildren, when they're older. Maybe no one, but it doesn't matter. What mattered was writing it, letting the words empty me. The doctor says my heart is tired. I believe him. Not because of sickness, but because of the journey. So many years, so many battles. But I'm not afraid. Death isn't scary when you've learned to say goodbye on your feet. Today I decided to organize some things. I took out the old documents, the photos, the watches I no longer use. I made 3 piles on the table. One for Daniel, one for the children, and another to leave at the workshop, the one that no longer belongs to me, but where my soul still lives. In Daniel's pile, I put the notebook. On the first page, I added a few new lines. Don't feel guilty for being late to love. Some people take a lifetime to recognize it, and it's still worth it. After that, I went out to the garden. I sat under the lemon tree, the same spot where Teresa used to read in the afternoons. The sun fell golden on the leaves, and the air smelled of flowers and damp earth. I closed my eyes and listened to the world. The singing of birds, the distant sound of a child laughing in the street, the rustling of branches in the wind. It was life telling me that everything was okay. I thought about Daniel, about my grandchildren, about what would come after me, and I knew that, somehow, the story would continue, not as an inheritance of property, but of memory. Because what you leave behind are not things but footprints, and my footprints, finally, were no longer bleeding. I started to feel a sweet tiredness, the kind that doesn't hurt. I rested my head on the back of the chair and looked at the sky. A white cloud drifted slowly by, and in it I thought I saw the shape of a familiar face. Teresa, smiling, just like the last time I saw her. It's done, my love, I whispered. Our son has come home. The wind blew stronger, and for a moment, the blossoms of the lemon tree fell on me like white rain. I closed my eyes and let them cover me. Maybe Daniel will come tomorrow. Maybe he'll find the notebook on the table and read it. Maybe he'll sit right here, under this tree, with his children running around him. I don't know, but if he does, I want him to understand something. That love, even when it breaks, always leaves roots, and that sometimes a single new flower is enough to remember that life goes on. The sun began to set. I felt the warmth on my face, my heart beating slowly as if marking the end of a melody. I smiled, because for the first time I didn't feel alone, and as the day died, I thought of that candle I blew out on my birthday, the one where I made my wish. Yes, Daniel, my wish came true. Sometimes life doesn't give us second chances, but it does give us time. Time to understand, to forgive, and to look back without resentment. Because in the end, parents are not eternal, and children don't always understand in time. But when the silence is broken, when an I love you arrives after years, it still has the same value. It's never too late to come home. This story isn't just about pain, but about love, the love that survives mistakes, pride, and time. And if life teaches us anything, it's that forgiveness isn't always spoken with words. Sometimes it's expressed with a hug, or with a flower that grows again where there were once thorns. If this story touched your heart, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Every day we share new stories full of emotion, reflection, and life. Stories that remind us that there is always a chance to heal, and that love, true love, never dies. See you in the next story.